All right, everybody, what's going on? And welcome to today's edition of SWAC Talk. This is the show we cover the SWAC inside and out. I'm your tour guide around the SWAC, C. Wells, coming at you, and we are gonna continue this little returning leaders thing that we're doing. We started off with the running backs, and now we're gonna do the wide receivers, tight ends, pass catchers, however you want to put it. We're gonna take a look at the returning leading receivers for each team. Again, I just let it throw this out there. This is strictly for guys that played for this particular team last season. You know, if you got a guy coming in from somewhere that had really solid stats, it's not going to count. It only counts for the guys that played at that school and are coming back this season. So your top-notch guy coming in, that you're bragging on, he don't count for nobody. So we're not going to do that. This is strictly just for the guys that played at this school last year and are coming back. So I also just want to point out the top guy on each team, not necessarily going down the list. But y'all can make sure y'all check out the socials. Facebook is SWAC Talk, Instagram, SWAC Talk, Twitter, SWAC Talk 76. Like the video, share, comment, and don't forget to subscribe. If you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button. If you have, hey, thank you. If you haven't, still thank you. I know you will at some point, so go ahead and hit that button. And then hit that notification bell to be alerted to any videos that I drop, because I typically drop on Sundays and Wednesdays, but I do videos from other times, so you always want to catch them when they drop. So let's go ahead and jump into this. We'll start and run it down like we normally do. Start off with the Bulldogs, Alabama A&M. Like I keep saying, man, I'm gonna keep pushing this narrative. Bama A&M offense was a really good offense last season. Of course, the record wasn't there, and everybody knows, Coach Maynard is on the hot seat. Is he gonna be gone this season? Is he gonna make it through the year, and all of that? But they have one of the top running backs coming back, and they have one of the leading wide receivers in the conference coming back, Jacoby Hewitt. He finished the season with 516 yards, which would put him at 6th in the league, and that will also make him the second highest returning receiver in terms of yardage. And he also had 57.3 yards per game, which will put him at 3rd, and that would make him the leading receiver in yards per game returning. And also finished with 32 catches on the season. So that had him finish at number 13 in the league last season. So he's one of the top guys coming back. They returned some other guys in that offense, and this offense was pretty solid last season. The passing game finished 3rd at 221 yards per game. They did have 13 interceptions. Which was probably one of the biggest issues that they had, and that was tied for the league lead. But they also had 19 touchdowns, which was 3rd in the league. This offense finished 5th in rushing at 153 yards per game, and total offense they finished 3rd at 374 yards per game, and they were 2nd in scoring offense at 29.6 yards per game. So this was a very good offense, and I think it's only going to get better as these guys have become more experienced, and a guy like Hewitt is definitely going to be a name that more people should know. I think he should be on preseason all-conference lists, and I expect to see more production from him as the season continues. Next is Bama State, and their top guy coming back is Tyree Saunders. Again, I know Bama State's bringing in a lot of guys to kind of acclimate and build a system with Andrew Body. But Saunders is the leading returning guy. He finished with 16 catches for 283 yards, averaged 17.6 yards per catch with 2 touchdowns, and along with 76 with a 31.4 yard per game average in 9 games. Now, we all know that Keyshawn Johnson was the top dog in that passing attack. He actually led the league with 61 receptions, 829 yards. He tied for the league lead in touchdowns with 7. He averaged 13.6 yards per catch, averaged 6 catches per game, and 82.9 yards per game, which also led the league. So that was the guy. That was the guy. Everybody knew that was the guy. Uh, Saunders was second with 16 catches. So as you can see, 61 and 16 is a big gap there. So there's a lot of receptions to be had this upcoming season, and I think Saunders is a guy that can get it done. He in his limited production, he had a very good game against Prairie View in their next to last game. He finished that game with 6 catches, 120 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So him and Damon Stewart clicked well in that game, and you can kind of it was kind of an outlier when you look at the rest of his production, but it was it's able to be done. This offense passing wise was not as bad as it really seemed. They finished with 188 yards per game, 15 touchdowns, and only 8 interceptions on the season, and completed 65.2% of their passes, which was the highest number in the league. The rest of the offense, running game and scoring and all of that, just was not there. But once they made the change from Davis to Stewart, the offense kind of took off. So I think, adding a quarterback like Andrew Body, I think that can help this offense take an even bigger step with new coordinator and new offensive staff as a whole. So I think Tyree Saunders is a name to keep an eye out on. I think he can get some things done. Looking back at Hewitt, his season highs last season were he had 6 receptions against FAMU and 115 yards against Valley and 2 touchdowns against Tuskegee. So Hewitt and Saunders are the only 2 receivers returning. Two of 4 guys who finished with 100 yards in a game. So the other 2 are coming later in the list. So not a lot of high numbers coming back from guys, but some steady production from a lot of different players. For Alcorn, we have our first tight end on the list, and that's Travaris Truck Griffin. He finished the season with 25 catches, 317 yards, averaged 12.6 yards per catch, 4 touchdowns, a longer 52, and he averaged 31.7 yards per game in 10 games. This is the kind of guy that you kind of want to have on your offense when you're breaking in new pieces. You're gonna have a different quarterback regardless. Macon got some playing time last season, but wasn't the best in the passing game. Vaughn comes in as a transfer. So you're gonna have a new signal caller for the most part, and a guy like that in Griffin, who finished with 27 catches, was 18th in the league. That's a guy that can help this offense really develop. He had some pretty strong games this past season. He had 6 receptions against Grambling and Prairie View, 79 yards against Southern, and 2 touchdowns against Grambling. So he showed that he can make plays in big games. And as a tight end, you're gonna be open in the SWAC. And if you can make those catches and make defenses respect what you do, then you're gonna always be a weapon. And that's a solid weapon for Alcorn in their passing attack. Next up is Bethune-Cookman. They lost their top 3 receivers. So Omari Stewart is their returning leader. He finished with 12 catches, 122 yards, averaged 10.7 yards per catch, 1 touchdown, a longer 41, and a 13.5 yard per game average in 9 games. So as you can see, not a lot of production there. This offense really just was not that good last season offensively. Quarterback play was an issue. They had lots of injuries to quarterbacks. I think they played like 4 quarterbacks all season, so never got that consistency. Finished with 134 yards per game as an offense through the air, 9 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. They just, they really didn't have a lot going for them. 125 yards per game on the ground, 260 total yards of offense per game, and they averaged 18.5 points per game on the season. So not a lot of production, even with the guys that were there. Not much explosiveness from that offense, but Stewart had 1 really good game last season, and that was against Southern. He finished with 6 catches for 62 yards and 1 touchdown. That 41-yarder was his long, and that was his only touchdown. So Bethune-Cookman is bringing in a lot of guys through the portal on all positions. So I'm expecting to see a lot of competition for playing time at receiver. Will he be able to establish himself? That's something that we remain to see. But right now, he is the leading returning guy for the Wildcats. Next up is FAMU, and this is another team who had guys that were very productive leave, but they have some guys who are coming back that have the talent, and they're also bringing in more talent. Their thing is, deciding on who their quarterback is going to be. So, having a guy like Jamari Gassett, who finished the season with 24 catches, 320 yards, averaged 13.3 yards per catch, had 3 touchdowns, a longer 58, and 26.7 yards per game in 12 games. He showed that he could make some big catches. He had a big touchdown against Southern to kind of put the game away for them. He had a couple. He had a couple other really solid games. Finished with 5 catches as a season high against Valley, 77 yards against Texas Southern, and 1 touchdown against Bama State, Southern, and Texas Southern. So again, there's plenty of time to be had, but he's shown that he can be productive, and that's a guy that you want to take advantage of. You want a guy that can make the plays for you. You know what he can do. Giving him more responsibility and more opportunity, I think his numbers are only going to go up once they get their once they get their passing attack situated. Because starting having a new quarterback is really going to change a lot. You're gonna have to have some guys develop chemistry and grow together. So I think that he's gonna be one of those guys, I think, that can be a top guy in this conference once it's all said and done this season. Next up is Grambling. Javon Robinson. This is a young guy. He was a freshman last year. Grambling lost Lyndon Rash as a senior. He was their main guy, but statistically, their number 1 guy was Antonio Jones. He transferred to Temple, so that left Robinson as their number 3, receiver in stats. They left him as their leading receiver. He had a pretty solid freshman year: 30 catches, 368 yards, averaged 12.2 yards per catch, 2 touchdowns with a longer 50, 36.8 yards per game in 10 games of action. He had season highs of 7 receptions against Prairie View, 73 yards against Bethune-Cookman. He had a touchdown against Florida Memorial and UAPB. So he's shown that he can, make some things happen. My thing is they have new coaching staff as a whole, offense, new coordinator. We know Coach Dooley likes to try to air the ball out, and he's going to try to, he wants to take those shots down the field. Miles Crawley, I think he's a very good quarterback for them. Can they mesh that with what Dooley wants to do? If they can, then a guy like Robinson is going to be able to make those plays down the field, and even get the ball in space with his size and speed, and make some things happen. So I'm looking forward to seeing him in action, because I want to see what this offense does under Coach Dooley and Coach Joseph. Because regardless of who's the OC, the head guy does have some leeway in that, and so we're gonna see how that meshes. But Robinson is one of the top young guys returning, and I think that's definitely another name that you should look out for, because I think he has the potential to be really, really good this season if that offense can kind of get to clicking. Jackson State returns their leading receiver, and that's Fabian McCray. This is a guy who really had a really solid season last season. Finished the year with 41 receptions, which was 5th in the league. That makes him the leading returning receiver, 584 yards on the season, which also makes him the leading returning receiver in that category. 4 touchdowns. Again, puts him in the second list of the second spot of returning guys with touchdowns. And like I said, he averaged 14.2 yards per catch, 3.7 yards. 14.2 yards per catch, 3.7 catches per game, and he averaged 53.1 yards per game. And he did it in 11 games. So he's a guy who, kind of came on strong toward the end of the season. You're putting him and Jacoby and Morgan and Herb Mulligan as, kind of like the big three on that offense. The M's, I need a catchy name because they're all last names start with M. But, they're guys who all can grow together. This offense was very, very productive last season. Not necessarily, obviously, what it was in the previous 2 years, but still a very good offense that didn't really turn the ball over a lot. And was starting over to an extent. But you're returning more of a foundation this season, so I think the offense is going to be even better. He finished last season with 8 receptions against Bama State, 109 yards, and 2 touchdowns against Alcorn. He also had 2 touchdowns against Valley. Excuse me. Sorry, I'm looking at my list wrong. He had 109 yards and 2 touchdowns against Alcorn as his season highs. Moving on to Valley, a name that I'm quite sure most of y'all never heard of is Jackson Davis, and he's a tight end from Valley. He's only a sophomore this season. As a true freshman, he had a great season. 36 catches, 406 yards, 11.2 yards per catch, 3 touchdowns, a longer 62 and a 40.6 yard per game average in 10 games. Like I said, Valley's offense, really wasn't that good, but this young guy was very, very productive. Top 10 in the league in receptions at 36. Top 15 and top 20 in yards at 406. Had, like I said, 3 touchdowns, which tied him at 12. And just like I said, just a very good piece for Valley in an offense that was not that good. They only scored 12 points per game. They were last in total offense at 249 yards per game. They were last in rushing at 89 yards per game, and they were 10th in passing yardage per game at 159. And they only had 8 touchdowns. He had 3 of those 8. So him and Tajarian Williams can be a nice kind of combination of young guys that both were freshmen last year. They're both sophomores now. If they continue to grow together and you keep putting some pieces around them, this offense can be. It's gonna sound funny for me to say it, but this offense can be a middle of the pack offense if they can continue to develop, and obviously the O-line has to do their job. But this is the kind of guy that with the way football is right now, you get nervous when you see young guys produce like this because you know that somebody's watching them, and somebody's gonna try to snag him from Valley if he has a good season again. So don't really want that to happen, but that's something to keep an eye out on because that's the way it works now. He had a season high 7 receptions against Prairie View, 92 yards against Bethune-Cookman, and he scored a touchdown against Prairie View, Pine Bluff, and Alabama A&M. So Jackson Davis is definitely a name that you want to keep an eye out on. He's a tight end, and he's only a sophomore, so keep your eyes on him. Shamar Savage is the leader in returning receivers for Prairie View. He finished with 20 catches, 448 yards, 22.4 yards per catch, 2 touchdowns, longer 74, average 44.8 yards per game in 10 games. As you can see, that 22 yard per catch average leads the league by like 3 yards per catch. He's a deep threat. That's one of the things Prairie View always did in recent years was go deep. They didn't really throw the ball a lot, and they wouldn't dink and dunk you, but they would always try to hit you with something. And they had guys like Savage and Spiller who can take the top off of a defense. But this was a passing attack that just wasn't really that efficient all year, and they didn't really throw the ball a lot. They only threw the ball 252 times on the season, with 136 attempt, 136 completions. Both of those numbers were last in the league. They only had 9 touchdowns, which was next to last in the league, and completing 59% of their passes, which was like in the middle of the league. Excuse me, 54% of their passes, which was last in the league. I'm looking at the wrong number. 54%, which was last in the league. So they really just, passing wise, they just really didn't have it. And a combination of things, I don't think it necessarily was one whole factor, but they have a new coordinator this season. They have a renewed vigor about their offense. We have to figure out who their quarterback is going to be, but guys like Savage and Spiller, among other guys, can help this offense continue to grow because they do lose 2 top running backs as well. So they're going to come into the season as the #1 team in the West, and they do have some solid pieces, but they do have some questions like everybody else. So can they mesh all of that together? If they can, they're going to be very dangerous. But right now, all of that is an if because we don't know really anything about most of these teams definitively. But Savage is a guy who definitely can put up numbers. He finished with a season high 8 catches for 136 yards against Pine Bluff. He also had 1 touchdown against Valley and against Southern. So he's shown that he can have a very explosive game with that 8 for 136. But he also, other than that, didn't have much other production. So, some of that was the offense. And, if the offense is different, his numbers may be different. Next is Southern. Again, this was another offense that, wasn't pretty at times. Southern's offense was very boom or bust. No real consistency all year in terms of, being able to drive the ball down the field. They could hit big plays, but they really couldn't move the ball consistently, and they turned the ball over a lot. So that was one of the things that really hamstrung his offense. Southern didn't have a receiver finish with 20 catches at all. So everybody was, in the teens or lower. They did have a lot of guys catch passes, but they just didn't have that one guy that put up numbers. This team finished 4th in passing yards per game at 215. They had 14 touchdowns on the season, which would put them at 8th, but they had 13 interceptions, which led the league. So again, that was one of their biggest downfalls. And they completed 56% of their passes, which was 8th in the league as well. And you had a running game that was, at 111.9 yards per game. So that didn't really help you out that much either. And his offense finished at 23.2 points per game. It was a long time during the season where they couldn't cross 20 points. So you say all of that to say that you're not going to have a lot of production from guys. But Chandler Whitfield, who is their leading returning receiver, is a guy who can make those plays. He can, he can take it a distance. As witnessed by a 72-yard touchdown against FAMU. He can make some solid catches for you, can make some plays for you, but the opportunities have to be there. We'll see, if Southern can put things together offensively, and if they do, he's going to be a big part of that. He finished the season with 17 catches for 299 yards, averaged 17.5 yards per catch with 2 touchdowns. Like I said, a longer 72, an average of 29.9 yards per game in 10 games. He had 4 catches for 88 yards against FAMU. Those were season highs. He had a touchdown against FAMU and against Alcorn. So he's shown that he can make the plays, but, like pretty much everybody in the offense last season, he would have that 4 for 88 game in a loss, but then he would have other games where he may have a catch or 2 at most. So there was just no consistency for this team at all, and that's going to be vital for them to continue to grow. Next up is Texas Southern, and another tight end on our list, Jaron Johnson. He's a part of a pass catching group that with Trenton Leary and AJ Bennett are gonna be a very solid group of guys for Jace Wilson. One thing about TSU, if you go back the last 4 or 5 years, they, regardless of what their record was, they had really solid passing attacks. When you look at, the DeAndre Johnson days, the Devin Williams, those guys, they had great receivers to throw the ball to. They just, whether the defense wasn't getting it done, or they just couldn't really put the points on the board consistently. That was always something missing. But I think that this can be another solid group of pass catchers for Chase Wilson and TSU, as they're gonna have to lean on those guys until the running game comes around. And like I said, they have a new coach and an all new staff, so they have some things to work out. But this offense, it took a while to get going, and they kind of struggled at times, especially playing from ahead. They kind of struggled at times. They finished with 181 yards per game, which will put them at 8th in the league. They had 15 touchdowns, which would put them at tied for 5th in the league, and only 8 interceptions. So they took care of the ball pretty well. Those 8 interceptions tied for 2nd in the league. And that's what a guy who was not expected to be your starting quarterback coming into the season. And when you look at Johnson, he finished with 37 catches for 405 yards, 10.9 yards per catch, 4 touchdowns, and a longer 37 with a 40.5-yard average per game in 10 games. His season highs were 6 catches against Prairie View, 72 yards against FAMU, and a touchdown against Rice, Grambling, FAMU, and Jackson State. So I think this passing game is gonna definitely be a strength of FAMU. A TSU, but how well they do is definitely gonna still depend on how well they can run the ball, and what kind of system that they're running. Haven't really had a deep dive into who they are yet, so that's definitely something to keep our eyes out on. And our final team on the list is Pine Bluff, and Damian Dawkins is their guy. He's the second leading receiver behind Kenji Lewis, who went to Northern Illinois. Dawkins finished with 24 catches, 199 yards, 8.2 yards per catch, and no touchdowns. He had a longer 43 and average 18.09 yards per game in 11 games. Now, how he does this season is gonna be up to how he battles, because this team brought in a lot of receivers, out of the portal this season. So there's going to be a lot of competition for spots. How the passing attack depends on how the quarterback play goes, and the offensive line play. But this is a guy who has shown some flashes. He had a 7 reception game against Jackson State and Alcorn. He had 58 yards against Alcorn and 57 against Jackson State. I think he had like 51 against TSU at the end of the season. So he's had some games where he's put up some numbers, but he also has had games where he hasn't put up numbers. So, he's gonna have to, part him, part the system, part everybody else. He's gonna have to put it together. He's been there. I think this is his 4th year, and he's had only 2 touchdowns, both in his freshman year. So hasn't really gotten in the end zone. But he has the opportunity now to be one of the guys coming back with experience. So if he can take that step, then maybe that can help Pine Bluff, because Pine Bluff offensively, they weren't really much to write home about. They were 10th in total offense at 288 yards per game. They scored an average of 15.2 points per game, which was the 11th. They were 8th in rushing at 134 yards per game, and then their passing game was actually 6th at 100. Was actually 6th. Excuse me. Their passing attack was 11th at 153 yards per game. They had 11 touchdowns and 8 interceptions, which tied for 2nd in the league for the fewest interceptions. They completed 55% of their passes on the season, which was 10th in the league. So they have a lot of room for growth, and this team is steadily growing and steadily trying to add guys. And that kind of goes back to my discussion on Thursday about when when you adding a lot of guys late, is it a good thing or a bad thing? And right now for this team, it kind of means that they don't really have a lot that they like. So hopefully Dawkins is one of those guys that they like because he's been around a long time, and I think he's waiting for his breakout opportunity. So that's gonna do it for today's show, man. I thank y'all for tuning in and rocking with us. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video and comment and hit that notification bell, and we'll catch y'all on our next edition of SWAC Talk. I'm your tour guide around the SWAC C Wells signing out, and I'll catch y'all on the rebound. Peace.